excellent. Thanks so much. Much appreciated. Hey, folks, how is it going? Good to see you. Thanks for jumping on camera, Omar. Good to see your face. Hey, Veronica. Good to see you as always. I had a nice weekend. I got to spend some time in a hot tub, which is always like just the best thing for my life. Strongly recommend as much as you can do. It wasn't really that cold out to really deserve it, but it was worthwhile nonetheless. I wonder how you all are doing with functions. So I know last week we had, I don't know, what's the right way to, it was a speedy lesson, perhaps is a generous way to put it. But you've had some time, hopefully let a few things sort of float in the background, percolate. Any lingering feelings from that functions lesson? Anything still stressing you out? Any questions still? Anyone feeling a little bit better about it now that you've had some time to sort of think on it? All right, I see a couple folks typing. I'll go ahead and share my screen while you all are getting ready to respond. Any functional feelings? For those, you've shared something that I cannot relate to, but I assume it is deeply connected and a niche statement for someone that will connect. I think I played Hearthstone like once, so I assume stressful, maybe? Is that kind of the vibe? Yeah, okay. Just stressful. Gotcha. All right, read the exercise in the lesson and try to look online, but couldn't find anything without arrays. Well, perfect. Thanks for the segue. We're going into arrays today. Yeah, I think there's this phrase I heard a long time ago. It was someone sort of introducing JavaScript like a conference, something like that. And I think the talk was titled something like, in order to learn JavaScript, you must learn the entire universe. And that sometimes is how it feels with some of this stuff in terms of like, what's the right thing to introduce first? You kind of just want to introduce all of it all at the same time, and then it all connects, right? It's all relying on one another. So we're going to continue today with arrays. I think with arrays, we will see some stronger usage for iteration. It'll make a little bit more sense in terms of, how often are we counting up and down in programs? Not that much, perhaps, but we'll see how we can really leverage loops to make some really interesting choices in our programs. And then Thursday, we'll continue on with talking about objects, which are another type of collection we'll use that can be really powerful and making really robust applications. So I'm super excited about today's lesson. I think this is really going to level up the skills and tools you all have. And I think today should be maybe a little less breakneck speed, but we'll see. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the plan for today is to cover arrays. So in this lesson, we're going to explore arrays in JavaScript, key data structure for storing and managing collections of data. You're going to learn how to create, access, and manipulate array elements. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to create and initialize arrays in JavaScript, access and modify array elements, and use array methods for common operations like adding, removing, and iterating over elements. I'll say there is a good amount of syntax to learn for this lesson, but I think it's most of it I would say is pretty intuitive. It does what it says right on the tin. So hopefully it won't feel too overwhelming. Just a little preview of our agenda. We can see we're going to introduce arrays. We'll talk about creating, and then accessing, and then updating. And then we'll start to talk about some of the built-in methods and arrays and loops overall. But first, let's go ahead and start with our warm-up question. First warm-up question here. This is a little detailed, so I'll give you all a moment to read through this. I'm also going to copy the code into our live chat just in case that is easier to see or play around with. So we want to know, what is the output of this following program? You can see we're using a function here. So let me paste that code in our live chat. Got some answers coming in quick. All right, excellent. We got some folks guessing A here. Let's take a look. Yeah, correct answer here is hello world and goodbye moon. So the thing we're really looking at here is for all these little differences, where does the ampersand symbol come in? And do we have the right kind of spaces in different places, right? And so what we can see here with combined strings, we take two strings, join them together, but separate them by a space. We do that twice and assign the return value of that to two new variables called combined one and combined two. So remember, we're using the return value here to get out that final value from the function. And then we're going to join combined one and combined two with this ampersand with some spaces around it. So that leads us to A. Not too bad. All right, same thing here. Let's go ahead and try this out. Use that in chat as well. This one's a little bit different. What do y'all think? What is the output of this program? We got that several people are typing. Both got some feelings about it. Yeah, it's a little bit trickier than the last one. All right, cool. I'll give you all a few more seconds. Go ahead and just make a guess. If you're not sure, it's A-okay. But try and process through this. All right, excellent, y'all. Let's take a look at the solution here. Yeah, so once again, we're looking at A as the answer. But let's talk through this. This is like, this warm-up is joining basically everything we talked about, right? This is all the skills we've learned so far. So if you got this right, great. If you didn't get this right, that's okay. This is a lot of content showing up in the same spot. So first of all, we're using the function keyword to declare a new function. Fantastic. It's going to be called create message. Remember, we talked about naming functions, ideally starting with some kind of verb. So we have create in there, which is a nice way to start that function name. We have two parameters, right? Parameters that are part of the function signature as part of this function. The first one is greeting. The second one is name. Name has a default value that gets passed in if an argument is not passed in that slot, right? So the default value, if the name is undefined, is a string of friend. Then we're going to return, using the return keyword to get a value back from that function, a string. And this string is the string template with little backticks. And we're using that syntax to pass in the different variable values, the parameters values. So we'll get greeting, comma, name, exclamation point. We then have we call this function two times, I should say. We assign the return value to two new variables called message1 and message2. In the first example, we're passing in hello and we're passing in Alice. So that means there are values for both greeting and name. So the result we should expect to get is hello, comma, Alice, exclamation point. In the second situation, we're passing in just one value. That one value is going to get passed in and assigned to the parameter greeting. Name will then be given the default value of friend. So we should then see welcome, comma, friend, exclamation point. We're then going to join those together, right, with just a space in between. So we end up with hello, Alice, welcome, friend. A couple of other ways this could have gone, right? If we didn't pass anything in, at all, we would have gotten undefined, comma, friend, exclamation point, right? Because we don't have a default value for the first parameter, but we do for the second. If we tried to put Alice in here as the only argument, it would have said Alice, comma, friend, exclamation point, right? Because the order matters in terms of the arguments that we pass into these functions. So definitely pretty tricky. We're having to join all of our different knowledge together here, but this is absolutely the kind of structure you might see in a real program. Whew, all right, let's add more, right? We've learned all of this. Let's go ahead and add a bit more to our toolbox. So we're going to talk about what an array is now. The idea of an array is a data structure that allows you to store multiple values in a single variable, organized sequentially. It has a particular order. Arrays are used to group related data together, making it easier to access, manage, and manipulate multiple values efficiently. So one note before we move on to this, remember in the past we talked about other types of data types. So we talked about strings, we talked about numbers, we talked about booleans, we talked about undefined and null. Those were different data types. They're often referred to as primitive data types. There's a couple different reasons behind that, but one is that they're pretty static, right? The number 42 is going to be the number 42. That is what it is. Yeah, something like an array is a reference type or a data structure or a collection. All of those different words could apply. And they're a bit more dynamic in that we have the array structure, but they're actually going to contain other data types within them. So in this example, we see here, we have 3 different variable names that are holding on to different fruits. And then with an array, we're saying let fruits, plural, equal this entire list of all those different fruits. How you can recognize an array is that you'll see these brackets wrapped around, and each element in the array is of its own data type and is separated by a comma. So there are 3 elements within this array. Cool. Let me pause here. Any questions about this so far? Omar, I'm trying to decipher your questions. If I define the greeting with the default value, but not the name, what would have happened if I had only one value in the let message to? Let me get back to this. If that's all right, once we get closer to the break, and then we can jump back and I can run through the code. But please remind me if I forget. So definitely love to revisit that. All right, so this is the main concept here for arrays. What we're going to do now in terms of this little section, we're going to start to walk through a few different examples of arrays. How the curriculum is written right now, it sort of just walks through the example, but doesn't necessarily explain all the methods that are involved. So go ahead and right now, there's going to be a lot of details we're going to look at. Go ahead and just stay with the concept idea of it. We'll try and keep it a little high level, and then we're going to dive into the actual mechanics of how things work. All right, so next concept here. So again, we have an array. This is an ordered list, a collection of elements. Each item in an array is referred to as an element, and each element is associated with a numerical index that indicates its position in the array, starting from 0. That is quite important, starting from 0. So we have let fruits equal apple, banana, cherry. A couple notes here. Again, we can tell it's an array because of the brackets. Apple is the first element in that array. Banana is the second element in that array. Cherry is the third element in that array. But if we were going to talk about the elements in terms of how they are referenced in code, we would actually say that the first element here, what we would think of as first, has an index of 0. Right, so an index of 0. The second element has an index of 1. The third element has an index of 2. You can think of the index as kind of like the person's address, right? As opposed to first house on the street, second house on the street. The index starts from 0, although we might talk about it as the first or second element. So the index is going to become pretty important as we move ahead. So arrays allow us to group related data together, making it easier to manage and access. We saw an example of that with fruits. This is one with student names. One thing that I should note here is that while it is typical and I would say recommended to have sort of the same data type, the same type of data in an array, as with many things, you can do whatever you want, right? So if you want to have an array that has a number, a string, a Boolean, you can do that. In general, particularly in this course, and I would say in a lot of real world examples, you'll see they'll all contain the same type of data structures. Arrays also allow us to perform operations on multiple values at once, such as sorting or searching. So again, we have not talked about this method, but we can see here we have an array of numbers, 1 through 6. And then we want to perform some kind of operation that allows us to just grab the even number. This dot filter method is a method that is only accessible to arrays and allows us to perform that. So that's a special power we're going to get with arrays is access to a lot of their methods. One note actually before I go forward, and I apologize if I already explained this, but I just want to make sure I did before moving forward. You might have heard me using the word method and the word function before. So we learned about functions last time. We were writing our own functions. The word method often applies to a function that is attached to something else, right? So in this case, the array numbers has a dot filter method. Our strings had like a dot to uppercase method, right? Numbers have a dot to string method. So that's just my distinction there, which is pretty standard overall. All right, so just to recap, so we will gain access to a number of methods that will allow us to work with arrays in some pretty nice ways. Arrays also have dynamic size, so they can grow and shrink. We can see here that we have these methods, this array methods called push and pop. Push is going to push something onto the end of the array. So we'll see here we have our array of milk and bread. We can add eggs and pop something off the end of that array. So if we popped afterwards, that removes that egg. So we're going to gain some methods that allow us to change the size of arrays. And overall, arrays, particularly in JavaScript, are quite dynamic. In other programming languages, sometimes you need to define the size of the array before you create it. In JavaScript, you just go with the flow. You can add as many elements as you want. You can remove elements as you like. Arrays in JavaScript have a few important characteristics we've discussed here, right? So they're first of all ordered. So it's just important to note that the order those elements are within the array is will stay as is. They are indexed. We can see here we are using sort of a special property, which we'll talk about, to access values within the array based on their index. Again, this is like pulling out a value based on its particular address. They are also immutable, and what that means is we can change the actual array itself, the contents of the array. So this is showing an operation where we're not reassigning the variable of fruits to a new array. We're actually modifying the overall structure within it. And again, we will see how to do this in more detail in the following lessons. Oops, apologies here. And then last little step here is just array properties and methods. In addition to the key characteristics we just saw, arrays in JavaScript have properties and methods. So properties being something like .length, methods being something like .push or .pop. Array properties are characteristics of an array, like its length, while array methods are actions you can perform on an array, like adding or removing. So as we can see here, so for example, the length property automatically tracks how many elements are in the array, which is helpful for tasks like looping through the array. Methods like push and pop allow you to add or remove elements, either at the end or beginning of an array. Other methods, such as map and filter, help you create new arrays based on the data in the original array. These built-in tools let you manage and modify arrays without needing to write extra code from scratch. So again, just to sort of recap here, high level, arrays are ordered and structured. They're collections of data. You can put any kind of data type inside of them. We're going to get access to a number of methods, which we can learn to modify those arrays. And arrays will have some properties as well, like .length. This all we're going to be able to do is sort of collect data together and be able to iterate on, change, work with, receive information from that data structure. All right, that is sort of our introduction. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here. So in JavaScript, an array is represented by square brackets. You can create an empty array by assigning these square brackets to a variable with a descriptive name. This variable then holds the array and can be used to access and manipulate its contents. So our example here, our syntax is let array name equals empty brackets, semicolon. And an example might be something like empty list equals empty brackets. We can, of course, also create arrays that already have values within them. So in this example, the syntax might look something like defining a variable and setting it equal to an array, that's going to be the brackets, and placing individual values within it separated by commas. Every time you have a comma, that's stating there's an individual element within the array. And this is our example from earlier. The length property will return an integer that represents the number of elements in that array. So how you call the length property is with array name dot length, whatever that variable is, whatever that array is. And so for an example here, if we have this fruits array with 3 elements inside of it, we'll call dot length, and then we'll receive the number 3, the data type 3. This is going to be useful in a few different ways. As we'll see, we're going to be able to use this to be able to loop over arrays. And you can also, of course, just use it to sort of see what the size of something is. So for example, let's say we had an array that was representing a whole bunch of folks in a line, right? Maybe they signed up to receive a product or be first in for an event. We could call dot length to see how many folks are within that line. All right, lots of talking. Let's look at some code. Let me give you all a second to just get to this page if you are following along. So please navigate to this first exercise here. Exercise, create a bucket list array. And let's go ahead and do this first one together. So again, we talked about arrays so far. Let's go ahead and implement one. The first thing we're going to do as part of this exercise, so we're going to initialize an array named bucket list with at least 5 items that you would like to accomplish in your lifetime. These items can be a mix of travel destination, personal goals, or experiences, and they have some examples here. All right, so let's take a look at how we can do that. So the first thing it asks us to do is initialize an array named bucket list. So we're going to go ahead and define, wait for my keyboard to wake up here. We're going to define a variable, call it bucket list. This can be a constant variable or a variable declared with let. That is okay. Within this array, we need to define some other data types in here. I'm just going to go ahead and just add a little bit right now. So I'm going to do a console log down here, and I'm going to say the length of this. So I'm calling the dot length property of bucket list. It's just to verify, show you this is indeed true, right? If we run this code right now, we get the length is 0, right? That is because there are no items within this array. There are no elements within the array. And now what this exercise is asking us to do is to write at least 5 items that you'd like to accomplish in your lifetime. So let me ask you all, what's in y'all's bucket list? What do you all want to be doing? What do you want to accomplish sometime in your lifetime? Let's get some examples and let's build up this array. So this is too existential of a question. Perhaps you all are thinking of this too much. What do y'all think? What are some things you want to achieve in your lifetime? All right, we got some travel goals here. Travel across the world, visit Japan. So let's go ahead and do that first one here. So travel across the world. So at this point, I'm adding just one element to my array. You'll see I'm sort of entering this down. This is just more of a spacing and readability thing. We could have our array just look like this. Or you can sort of break it up over multiple lines. So at this point, our array has one item within it. So if we rerun this code, we'll see the number changes to just be 1. All right. Folks just picking different locations. I like it. All right, so let's just do bucket list vacation destination. Yeah, hey, that's what we're doing. Let's just do it. So as part of traveling across the world, let's add in some countries in here. So we got Japan. We got, oops, let me get my comma in the right place. Lithuania, Iceland. Canada, not the United States. It's fine. Canada's probably more fun. I'm right near Vancouver, BC. It's quite beautiful. All right, so now we have 4 different locations in here. If we rerun this code, we'll see that the length does indeed change to 4. One thing, just a note in terms of syntax, you can actually leave a little end comma on the end over here, and JavaScript will just ignore it because JavaScript's being real chill. It's like whatever you want, man. Right, so just this will work as well. Right, our next step is to print the bucket list array to the console to display our list of items. So I've been displaying just the length. Let me go ahead and clear this and let's print out the entire thing. And now we can see in terms of the output, here's what comes out, right? We see this array where we can have our locations within it. Pretty nice. It's also pretty clear to tell what data type these values are, which is also pretty nice. Cool. Our last step is look at the length. We have done that before. So I'll go ahead and print that out as well. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. All right, so in this case, we've created an array. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as an array literal. I'll just be referring to it as an array, so little brackets. And then we've entered in 4 elements into it. Each of those elements is a string data type. Each of those elements is a string data type. And in total, there are 4 of them. We're moving forward. Any questions on this? Or can you all tell me what is the index of Iceland? Either do y'all have any questions, or what is the index of Iceland? All right, we got some folks printing out numbers here. Yeah, this has an index of 2, right? So remember, in terms of the number of elements in here, there are 4 elements, but for arrays, we start counting from 0. So we go, has an index of 0. Japan has an index of 0, 1, 2. Cool. Nice job, y'all. So now we know how to create arrays. Let's talk about accessing those elements. This could also be referred to as reading from the element. And that'll come up a little bit later as we talk about some different operations you can perform on our different arrays. So an index in an array is a numerical value that represents the position of an element within the array. In JavaScript, array indices start at 0, meaning the first element of an array has an index of 0. I know that kind of wording can feel confusing, right? So it's just important to always try and talk clearly, and I'll do my best to do this, talk clearly about if we're talking about the index or we're talking about the overall order of the elements. So again, first element has an index of 0, second element has an index of 1, so on and so forth. We can access individual elements of an array using their index, and we're going to use brackets on the array as well. This is sometimes confusing for folks because we use brackets to define an array, but then we're also using brackets to access an array. It's important to note this is not a new array. When we're using brackets right next to a variable or right next to an array, what is going within that those brackets should be a numerical representation of the index. All right, so when we look at this example here, we have 3 different colors in here, red, green, and blue. If we wanted to access the first color, we're going to say colors, that array name, at, this is the common terminology, you would say colors at, using the brackets, 0. 0 is the index. That index then goes into the array and finds the value that matches the index, and it then returns that value so that it can be assigned to the left. So first color is going to point to the first element in the array, right, which is our string red. Okay. In our next example, we have here 1, right, that is going to access the value green. And if we assign that to second color will be green. So this is our way to sort of jump into an array, grab one of those values, and then assign it elsewhere. So we're able to sort of pluck a value out depending on its index. If we attempt to access an array element with an index that's outside the range of valid indices, and it's saying here 0 to array length -1. So just to explain that a little bit more, if we have an array of 3 elements, the last index is that array length -1. So the last index is 2. So that's what this is referring to. If we try and access some value that is outside of those indices, this results in an out-of-bound access. In JavaScript, accessing an out-of-bounds index does not throw an error. Instead, it returns undefined. In other languages, you might get an error. In this case, you're just going to get the value undefined. So we see that example right here. With fruits, we have 3 elements inside of the last index. It's 3 minus 1, right? It's 2. So we have here unknown fruit equals fruits at 3. That's sort of asking for a value that's outside the bounds of this array. So when we log out unknown fruit, that gets undefined. This is true as well if we did something like fruits at -10 or something like that, right? So we only are going to pull out values if they have a matching index. Otherwise, we're going to get back undefined. All right, last little bit here. So off by 1 errors. And we have an exercise here. Oh, dang, I keep doing that. Apologies. All right. So in JavaScript, arrays are 0 index, meaning the first element of array is at index 0, second element index 1, so on. This indexing system is important to understand because it affects how you access and manipulate elements in an array. For an array with n elements, the valid indices range from 0 to n minus 1, where n is the length of the array. And again, we see sort of an example here. So in this case, we have colors that equals red, green, blue. Access the first item. So it's going to be 0. That's accessing the first element in the array. To access the last item, no matter its length, you could do something like this. So this line of code is saying colors, that's referencing the array. And then we have the brackets to signify that we're going to access an element within that array. So colors at, and then we pass in an expression inside of these brackets. So this expression is colors.length, which is 3 minus 1, which is going to be the index of 2. That's going to grab the last element in the array. This is a lot of code in just one little line here, right? But what is really powerful about this is if this array had 1,000 items in it, this code would still return the last element of that array because it's going to pull the length and then just subtract by 1. So no matter what, if you always want to grab the last element of the array, this is what you're looking like. Yeah, so just important to keep that in mind. It is easy to get off by 1 with arrays because we often think of things as first, second, third, but again, arrays are 0 index, so we're counting starting at 0 for this. Tim is asking, can I also put -2, -3? I want to say in Ruby you can do that, and I think in Python you can do that maybe as well. In JavaScript, unless they make some changes, which is always getting updated, I do not believe you can. Let's go ahead and just take a look so we don't have to guess. So I'm just opening up the terminal console here. I'll make this bigger. I guess, Tim, this is what I'm assuming you're asking. You let me know if I'm getting at the wrong thing here. So I think what you're asking is if, for example, I say colors at -1, you would hope that would return blue, right? Like we're counting backwards from the end of the array. In other languages, this would work, but as we can see here, this is returning undefined. So this is not something that JavaScript has access to. Instead, if we wanted to grab the last element, we need to reference the length here. And then we will actually get the value here. Kind of bummer. But, you know, so it goes. Driver's saying, I think he means in length. -2, -3. Okay. So instead saying colors.length, let's do apologies then. Yeah. In that case, yeah, you can subtract as much as you want. This is an expression still. So as we can see, clear this out, make it a little bit clearer. Thanks for helping clarify, y'all. So if I grab the color's length, like -1, -2, -3, that's going to give us an index. If you go too far, you might go back into out of bound range, right? So we can see here, if I say colors.length, that's out of bound. -1 is blue, -2 is green, -3 is red, -4 is undefined again, because now it's equal to -1. All right, excellent. Thanks, y'all. Good question. All right, we have another exercise here. So we're going to practice accessing elements of an array of creating a list of your favorite movies, ordered from most favorite to least favorite. We're going to initialize an array named favorite movies with the titles of 5 of your favorite movies, listed in order of preference from most favorite to least favorite. Let's go ahead and start there. We'll do this together. Let me give you all just a few seconds to do this. We don't need to pause the recording or anything like that. I'll give you all 30 seconds or so to get started, and then I will follow along. We'll kind of go just sort of back and forth here. All right, so take a moment and sort of start this array. Go ahead and create an array named favorite movies, and start to add some titles of your favorite movies. All right, 30, 45 seconds, and then I will check back in with you all. Go ahead and just try and get started on this on your own, those of you who are at your computers. Right, hopefully you all were able to get started here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and type out our favorite movies array. Hey, what are some of y'all's favorite movies? What should we add to this list? Which think? Gosh, are you really typing this out on your phone? It's incredible. You're quick, man. All right, we got Simpsons movies, Glorious Bastards, Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, The Mole. Let's grab one of those. Simpsons movie. Chris says Coming to America. Classic. Mad Max. There's so many. So many. We'll leave that right there. Some other movies. What else do y'all like? Civil War. Captain America Civil War? Or a different movie, Civil War. Yeah, Captain America. I like that one too. It's a good one. Yeah, Fury Road. Love Mad Max Fury Road. No Way Home. I don't know that. Ooh, people are picking fun ones. Nice. All right, Back to the Future. Oops. To the Future. I like that. Sounds of the Lambs. Ooh, like some spooky stuff. All right, let's end there. This is a pretty good list for sure. All right, so we have this entire list now of movies. Thanks to you all. Let's first of all just go ahead and check how many movies we've added to this. It asks for you all to add 5, but hey, we're coding. We can do whatever we want. That is our list. Let's check the length. In this case, we have 7 in here. All right, excellent. So next, we're going to print the title of your most favorite movie. In this case, it'll just be the first one that came up to the console. So to print the first movie, right, we're going to use our brackets to access the element at a particular index, and we're going to pass in 0 because 0 represents the first element of the array. So if we print this out, we get the Simpsons movie. This is the string, the Simpsons movie. Next, we're going to print the title of our third favorite movie to the console. So if I want to type, if I want to print out the third favorite movie, what index am I trying to get at? What index am I trying to get at? I want the third favorite movie. Yeah, thanks so much, y'all. Not able to trick you, right? We're going for 2, right? Because we are starting at 0. So to print out the third favorite movie in this list, In that case, it is Mad Max Fury Road. All right, second to last, we want to print out the title of our least favorite movie, which is the last on the list, which isn't our least favorite movie, but our last in this list, right? So if I want to print out the last item in this list, I would first I would access the overall length of our movie list and then subtract 1. Right, so favorite movies.length minus 1. Because we know the length of this is 7, we could also say the integer 6, but if we want to always be able to grab the last one, we can just do this. In this case, in our list, it is Silence of the Lambs. Our last ask here is to pick one movie from our list, other than the first and last, move to recommendation message to the console, such as I highly recommend watching this movie title. So let me give you all a second to do that. You'll see the example down here. We had some different console log statements that are like my top favorite movie, third, least favorite. Go ahead and do this last step of I highly recommend watching one of these inside of here, instead of your list, I should say, and add that as a console log statement. I'll go ahead and give y'all just like 30 seconds or so to try that out. So again, you can pick whichever movie you want. Make sure it is not one of the ones we just featured here. It's not perfect, Omar. Appreciate it. All right, so hopefully it looks something like you're going to say, I highly recommend watching, add a little space in here, and then access one of these movies. So we can say favorite movies 4, 3, any of the ones we haven't accessed as of yet. We print that out. You see at the very end down here, we can see the title of the movie. Or we could also use string interpolation with the template literals or backtext. So I could say, I highly recommend watching, and then use our $, curly braces, and we can place the entire expression here. So favorite movies, let's say at 3, inside of this curly brace. That would work fine as well. Right, not bad. Any questions here about accessing values within an array? Anything you're wondering about here? So remember, we can create arrays using the brackets, pass values in, and separate each element by a comma, and then we can access each element within that by using the index, referencing it within those brackets. Any questions about this? Right, cool, not bad. Let's see where we're going, cool. Excellent, then let's move on to modifying existing elements. So we've created our arrays, we've then read data from our arrays, right? We've accessed values within based on the index. Now let's talk about how we could update or modify or change our arrays. All right, so we can update existing elements in an array by accessing them with their index and then assigning a new value. So here's the syntax we're looking at right here. So we have array name at index, whatever that index is, and then we're going to set it equal to some new value. So it looks similar to when we've been defining variables. So our example here is we have our fruits array, we have apple, banana, and cherry. On the left-hand side of the equal sign, we're going to say fruits at 1, right? 1 is the index. That's going to access the second element in the array, so this would be banana. And then we're setting that spot equal to this new value of orange. So we're replacing the value from banana to orange. Then when we log out the entire fruits array, we'll have apple, orange, cherry. So it's replacing that value. That's the way to sort of precision target a specific index of an array. If you want to just add an element to the end of the array, or potentially multiple elements, you can use the dot push method. So remember, a method is a function attached to a specific type of data structure, specific type of collection. So the syntax here is our array name dot push, and then we can enter in as many elements as we want, separated by commas. So in our example right here, we have let fruits equal apple, orange, cherry. We're going to say fruits dot push banana and grape. It's going to add a banana and grape to the very end of the array. And if we print out that entire fruits array, we'll see we have apple, orange, cherry, and then banana and grape. So we've added each of those elements there. The push method can add multiple elements at once. The length of the array is going to increase depending on how many elements we've added to it. And the method will return the new length of the array. So if we console logged out this expression, we get the new length. On the flip side, we can use .pop to remove the last element from an array. So we're pushing and popping from the very end. If we use .pop, it'll remove, in this example, right, our fruits array is apple, orange, cherry, and banana. Fruits.pop removes banana from the end. Whatever element is removed, that is what is going to get returned as part of that expression. So in this example, a new variable is declared called removed fruit. That's going to be set equal to fruits.pop. The resulting array of fruits, which has just been popped from, right, an element has been removed from it. We'll see here apple, orange, and cherry. It's banana has been removed from it. And then console.log removed fruit, that is banana. That is the removed element. So this is pretty important. I know it seems like we're kind of just like tossing around these strings here, right? But the idea is that as soon as we pop something from the end of this array, we don't have access to that value anymore. So if for some reason we wanted to still use it for something later, which is actually quite common, in that case, we would need to assign it to a variable. Otherwise, it just disappears sort of into the ether there. So if we want to capture that variable that we're removing, or that, excuse me, I should say that value that we're removing, we'll need to assign it to a variable with .pop. All right, the pop method removes the last element from the array and returns that element. The length of the array decreases by 1. If the array is empty, pop returns undefined. Okay, I see a couple questions in chat, so let's go ahead and play around with this. See if we can answer those. Oof, let me see if I can hide some of these things. Let's not show warnings. Let's not show errors. Okay. Excellent. So a couple questions are, can we remove multiple elements at the same time or specific elements from the middle or the beginning of the array? Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about it. So let me go ahead and define our fruits variable up here. And I do want to show you all how we can find out these things ourselves, because while we're going to cover a lot of methods in this course, we're not going to cover every single one. And so it is really important to the core developer skill, sort of thinking through how to look things up. So let's go ahead and just model that a little bit here. What I would do is, so for example, if I want to say like, I'm trying to look for, can I remove multiple elements from an array with pop? First thing I might do is actually search for that pop method on the internet. So a good place you can always go to is MDN, which is Mozilla Developer Network. That is probably my go-to. And then I might say Mozilla Developer Network, JavaScript, pop. We can see here, it says this array.prototype.pop. I'm not going to dive into that too much, but we can see we have array here, pop. That's kind of what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. As soon as we get to this page, I feel like whenever we're working with like new developers, this is going to feel overwhelming. There's all this crazy stuff on the side. There's like an article, there's an ad, right? Like what are we looking at? In this case, it might feel a little bit overwhelming, but MDN is quite good at trying to distill and give you places to try things out, right? So it's actually quite a good resource. So we have this example here. In this example, it's showing us, we can actually run it right here, a few different examples. So it's saying, okay, if we plants.pop and log out that value, we get tomato, that's the last element in this list. We then log out the remaining array, and we just call pop again and then print it out. We can see kale is getting removed from that. We can then look down here to see if there's any other examples of, for example, removing pop, like removing multiple elements with pop. And at least from what I can see here, it does not look like that is the case, right? So it's not, perhaps something that's not on here, but in general, MDN tends to do a good job of capturing every detail about these different methods. So that would be my first sort of guess of like, probably not. Probably can't pop something more than one element. The other thing we could do though is we could always just try it out. Let's just see what happens if we try it out. So what might the syntax be here? If I said fruits.pop, what's really nice about using the console here is we can just sort of play around with things and refresh if we needed to. We passed in some value here. We can see we don't actually get anything special in terms of like popping 3 or something like that. So I'm going to say it's in this case, pop just removes the last element. That's it. The other question we had was how can we remove specific elements from the middle or the beginning of the array? And I think Dragish looks like you're kind of getting at maybe the same thing here or something like that. There is a method for that. So let me show you how I might search that. Okay. So I might then search something like MDN, JavaScript, remove element. Oh gosh, I can type from middle of array. And we can then see there's, first of all, something that pops up, sort of a suggested answer to this. We see a few questions in Google here that can hopefully be answered. And the first hit here is splice. So splice provides actually 2 different things. It allows us to remove elements from an array or replace removed elements and add things in between. So splice or slice might be the method you are looking for here. I'm not going to go over this just now. This is going to add some complexity. We'll see if we have time at the end. We can talk about some other array methods. But in terms of searching through all this, these are the perfect questions to be asking, right? It's like, what else can I do? How else do I manipulate this? And what I would say then is some of the best places to look would be going straight to Google or whatever your preferred search engine is and starting to type in some of the different keywords, sticking with like JavaScript, pop method, removing elements from an array. Right, the more syntax, the more language we have, the easier it's going to be to search for these things. And starting to play around with some of the ideas that show up here. So definitely the right kind of question to be asking. All right, let's leave it there. Let's come back to the key things. We talked about pop, right, which removes just the last element of the array, and push, which allows for multiple elements to be added. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and go through this exercise. For this one, I'm gonna have you all, I'm gonna give you all a few minutes here to go ahead and try this out on your own. Let me talk through it. So we're gonna practice modifying an array by updating elements, adding songs with .push, and removing songs with .pop. So in this case, you're putting together a little playlist. So let me go ahead and give you all, we'll say like 4 minutes or so. Go ahead and give it a shot on your own first. And then we'll come back and I'll go ahead and go over a potential solution here. All right. So about 4 minutes, it's going to be about 1 minute after the hour. All right. See you all in a few. Ivan, if you want to pause recording, you can, but so we can just. Cool. Thank you so much. All right. Excellent. Let's go ahead and do this together, y'all. You tell me what we need to do here. So the first thing, we're going to initialize an array named playlist with the following song titles. So we can go ahead and declare a new variable called playlist. And we're going to create an array. I see some of y'all created some actual songs in here. What are some songs we should add to our playlist? What do y'all think? Let's see from Joseph here. I'll add it. Good luck, babe. There, I know that one. What else? What are some other songs y'all are listening to? No, no songs, no music. Everyone listens just to silence, just white noise machine. Noise machine sounds 8 hours. Is that it? Yeah, behind blue eyes for me. Omar, we got back in black. Cool. Midnight. All right, we got 4 here. I think that's a-okay. All right, we're gonna change the title of the second song in the playlist to some new song. All right, so let's first talk about the syntax here. So in our playlist, we need the title of the second song. What's the index there? You know what I'm going to ask. What is the index, right, for our second song? Yeah, I can't pull one over on you all, right? So the second song is have an index of 1. All right, and then what song should we replace it with? We're gonna replace Behind Blue Eyes with something. What do y'all think? I honestly deeply empathize here. As soon as someone asks me, like, hey, what's a song you like? My brain goes completely blank. I've never heard a song in my life, but of course I have plenty, right? That I listen to all the time. Let's say, I don't know, what's one of those here, 365, Charlie XCX. There we go. So we'll replace that with a new value. Let's go ahead and log out our playlist a few different steps here. So first I'm going to log it out before reassignment. And then let's log out after song change. So you can take a look at the difference here. All right. Adjust this a little bit. Hopefully you all can see okay. All right, so before we can see we had this list of songs, and now we can see we've changed, right, the song order and replaced Behind Blue Eyes with 365. All right, next we're gonna use the push method to add some new song to it. So to do that, remember, I'm just gonna access the array and call .push. I can add as many songs as I want here, and it suggests adding 2 more songs. There are 2 more songs we can add here. I see some more from Joseph. Let's add some of those. So birds of a feather. Yeah. Please, please. All right, excellent. So we're gonna add those 2 songs. So I'm gonna say after pushing songs, let's log out on the playlist. So let's take a look at how that affects overall. You can notice in terms of the output here, which I think is kind of interesting. Like our terminal output figures out how to sort of add a bit more space, the more songs that get added in here, which is nice. So remember, we first had this list, then we reassigned one of those songs, removed one and replaced it with a new song. And then we added 2 more to the very end down here. Excellent. All right, next we're gonna use the pop method to remove the last song from the playlist. Store the removed song title in a variable named remove song. So I'm saying const remove song equals playlist dot pop. All right, we're removing that last one. I'm just gonna go ahead and log out here. Pop song. Save song. Let's go ahead and create a terminal. Run this again. So we just added, please, please, please. We're now going to remove, please, please, please. All right, we have printed the updated playlist multiple times, and then let's print. Oops, let's print it again. And we're going to print some message that says removed song. So we take a look at that now. We see what the removed song was, and then print out the full playlist, and then say what we were able to remove. Right, the only reason we're able to access that value from the very end, right, of our playlist is because we assigned it to this variable. All right. So in this example, we created an array. We then modified it, right, by updating the values. We pushed some values into it, and we popped a value from it. Okay. Cool. Before we get into arrays and loops, any questions on those? I'm gonna say basic, but I mean like foundational. That's easy, but just foundational sort of methods and things. Feel pretty comfortable with adding, removing, declaring arrays. All right. If there are any tiers, I'm not seeing them. So I'm gonna assume that means we're feeling okay. We're feeling all right. All right, let's get to the good stuff. This is where it gets a little spicy. All right, so we're going to iterate over our arrays using our loops. So in JavaScript, iterating over arrays is a common operation that allows you to access and manipulate each element in the array. There are some built-in methods to iterate over arrays, each with its own use cases and advantages. So we can use a for loop. A for loop will allow us to loop over and give us complete control over where we're going to access the array. And then we have two other methods, which are a bit more complex. The first is for each. For each provides a more concise way to iterate over arrays. It takes what's called a callback function as an argument and applies this function to each element in the array. So we'll talk about what that is. Map works similar, but it's actually going to return a new array based on the return results of that callback function. So all of these will iterate over arrays, and we're going to be able to use them in different ways to perform different kinds of operations. Let's start with what I would say is going to be the standard way and the standard tool I would reach for you all as you're just getting started out, which is just a regular for loop. All right, remember for loops? It's been a bit. It's been some time, but let's go ahead and walk through what we're looking at here. So in this example here, we have fruits array, right? Apple, banana, cherry, and then we have our standard for loop. You'll notice what might be different here than what you've seen before is we have fruits.length as part of the condition that we want to use to determine how many times our for loop should run. So the condition is that while I is less than fruits.length, we're also setting I equal to 0. The reason we're setting I equal to 0 is because in this example, we want to loop through every element in the array. So in order to do that, we need to start with the index of our array, which is 0. So I'm going to just run this code and we can take a look. You'll see that we have 3 different log statements that get run. First one is apple, second one's banana, last one's cherry. How this works, right, is if I'll add in the index right next to these so we can see both. When this for loop first starts, the index, I is equal to 0. That is the first index of an array. So we're able to access the first element of the array, that's apple. I then increases by 1, and then we go through again, right? And then we're able to access banana. I increases by 1 again. That sets equal to 2. 2 is the third element in the array. I increases again. It is now 3. 3 is not less than fruits.length because fruits.length is 3. So notice it does not say less than or equal to, it just says less than. So this is a typical loop that's going to allow you to iterate over every single element in your array. And what's nice about this is you can do whatever you want inside of here. You can do as many lines of code as you need. So you could just print out the values. You could print out the values and call another function. You could manipulate those values as you're iterating through it. All kinds of different things you can do within this for loop. This will give you access to every single element. All right. That's the one that's probably the most straightforward, but I will say that this can feel kind of confusing at a certain point where we're having, okay, we got fruits. We have fruits at I, right? We're doing a lot of pass-around variables. For even more clarity, something I do pretty typically is, even if it's just a couple lines of code, I'll actually redefine a new variable. And particularly if we have an array with a variable name that is plural, I'll give it that singular name. So I'll say something like const fruit equals fruits at I. That's referencing that single fruit at that moment, right, in the loop. And then we can just log out fruit here. That'll print out each one. The reason I like this is because for me, this starts to break it up so that the number of symbols we have wrapping around each other, it doesn't become too much. But for other folks, this can feel confusing because you're just trying to look at the difference between fruits and fruit, which perhaps it's a challenge. This to me, it's easier to parse through, but your mileage may vary. All right, let's talk about a bit of an aside here as we move into talking about for each and .map. Now, what I'll say is if that last example felt pretty good, you could totally stick there, and I think you will be okay. The thing we're trying to get at is looping over arrays, right? So our previous for loop did cover that, and that will allow you to solve all kinds of problems. Both for each and map, which we're going to learn about by talking about callback functions, those will do something similar, but they're not demonstrably different. It's not giving you a new superpower. It's just adding on, making a little bit, it reads a little bit more nicely, but it can be a little bit more technically confusing. So I would clarify this as sort of like a slightly advanced step. But if that last step was feeling like already too much, you're welcome to sort of stay with that mentally. So for now, let's just have fun with this. We'll learn a few new topics and we can try it out. All right, so callback functions could, I think, be its own full lesson. There's a lot to say here, and it's a really interesting idea in programming overall. What we're going to do with a callback function, or I should say in JavaScript, a callback function is a function that you give to another function to use later. You're packaging up this function, handing it over to a function, and that second function, it's going to decide when to call that function, right? So it's calling back to something you passed in earlier. It's a way to make sure certain code runs only after something else has finished, particularly in JavaScript, that can be important. So for example, if you want to run some code after waiting for 2 seconds, you can use a callback. So we have our example up here. And let me walk through this example. I'm going to go through this quite slowly, just because it's easy to get kind of overwhelmed here. So I'm just going to cut out some of this code. All right, so let's just take a look at these two functions that we have right here, right? So we have our greet function. This is saying hello name. So we would expect, I'm going to say, it's actually what we call it. So let's say greet. I'll say Wes. If I run this code, I'm just going to comment out these things. Let's clear the terminal here. We're expecting this kind of message to come back, right? We're just passing in the name overall. Okay, cool. The goal we're trying to get at is we actually want to add a little delay to this, a little timed delay. So we're going to create a new function. We're going to have it say hello. Let's first just go ahead and run this without this additional code that's about passing in a callback. Ivan, this one's here for you. It's saying hello to you. This was just the example that was already here. All right, so let's go ahead and run this code. All right, so we're seeing hello, Ivan. So just to walk through what's happening, we invoke the say hello function. That function, within that function, we then invoke the greet function, which is Ivan, pass in that as an argument. Inside of greet, it then says hello, Ivan. All right, not too bad so far. A little silly, perhaps, right? We're just calling a function that's calling a function. The example that they want to get at is this set timeout function. I'm just going to pull this aside so we can take a look at it. I'm just going to pull it down here. Let me ask you all, how many arguments does it look like the set timeout function is accepting? This code is correct. I haven't messed up here. There should be something more interesting happening. This code is correct. How many arguments does the set timeout function accept? All right, Joseph's going for 2. Joseph, can I ask, how do you know? How do you know that that's true, that it can accept 2? What signal do you have? Yeah, we get the comma, right? So in this case, once we can see this little comma, we know that, okay, so the thing that happens before that comma, that's one argument. And the thing that happens after, that's another argument, right? So this function, which has no name, it's called an anonymous function. This is also an argument. So this is a really powerful, really cool. Again, we could have an entire lesson on just talking about this. Really neat thing about JavaScript is that in JavaScript, functions can get passed around as well in the same way that you can pass around other data types, right? So just like you could pass a string into here, you can actually pass an anonymous function. Kind of weird, right? This function is an anonymous function. It could be named. We could say, my function name, and then we can write some code in here that is, again, it's still the function. It's still the function right here. So the example we started out with, let me go ahead and move some stuff around, is this. Okay, I'm gonna run this code. Let's see what happens. And then we will talk about what is going on in the order of these things. So I'm gonna just write a couple other console log statements here. Just sort of give us some clarity on the order of things that are happening. So right before calling, say hello. Say right after. All right, so you have 2 console log statements around this say hello function invocation, just so we can see sort of the order of things that happen. Let's clear our terminal. Let's run our code. All right, what's going on? What's happening here? So we'll notice a few things. First of all, we got the right before calling say hello function. That was printed out. Then we got the right after calling say hello function. Then a few seconds later, we got our message of hello, Ivan. Okay, so let's walk through this. So in terms of what is happening in this code, our functions get defined. Great, our program goes great. I'll go reference those as soon as I need them. Fantastic. We then get to line 11. On line 11, we see there's a console log statement, and our program dutifully prints out that console log statement. Fantastic. Then we call say hello. So what does say hello do? Well, say hello calls this function. Fantastic. Inside this function, we see there is this other function called set timeout. How do I know set timeout is a function? Because it has parentheses, right? That gives us a clue. This is indeed a function. So we're calling the set timeout function. Set timeout, as we discussed, takes 2 arguments. What's the first argument? First argument here is a function. This function, which I've called my function, that's the first argument that gets passed in. This second argument represents the number of milliseconds that, the number of like millisecond pause we should have before we call the first argument we passed into it. So it's saying 2 seconds later, go ahead and call this function. And that is the rule of set timeout. So timeout takes 2 arguments. The first argument is a function, and the second argument is how long you want set timeout to wait before calling that function. So it's really important. I'm trying to be really clear here and precise with my language here. This function of my function does not get called until that 2 seconds pass. And the thing that calls it is set timeout. It is the thing that is calling that function. When that function gets called, we get greet, greet gets called, and that is what actually prints out our hello hyphen statement. This is a lot of, we're bouncing around a few different functions here. The callback function, I see a couple questions, please continue to add that. I'll answer in just a second here. The callback function, in terms of what we are referring to here, that is this function that I'm highlighting. This function is a callback function by virtue of the fact that it is passed into another function. That's all that a callback function means. It's just a reference to a function that's passed in as an argument. And what we're doing there is we're passing over the function so that the function it passes into, we're delegating who gets to call it. All right, so this is the callback function. It does not have to be set timeout. Set timeout is not about a callback function. You can have a callback function without set timeout. It's not about having a function within the callback function. Callback function is any function that gets passed into another function. That's it. All right, Jarvis is asking, shouldn't line 13 be displayed only after line 12 is displayed? Yeah, love this question. There's a whole, again, a whole other lesson. I think actually this will, maybe I'll get to this. Maybe once you get to React, start talking about async stuff. That's what I'm remembering right now. What is actually happening here, I'm going to give sort of an abbreviated version of this, because again, this could derail us a bit, but just to talk briefly about this. When our program runs, it defines these functions, fantastic. It then gets to this line of code, fires off that line of code, great. Sees say hello. This line of code did actually run. It did run, but what is running is a statement that says, hey, in 2 seconds, get back to this thing. And then we move on. So once we've moved on, immediately afterwards, we log out the second statement of right after calling say hello. And 2 seconds later, that's when we get this console log statement getting printed out. So what's happening here is JavaScript is trying to run through and not block any of the code. It's not pausing to wait for these 2 seconds to pass. It just runs through and says, great, I'm delegating that till later. I'll see if I can find the video about it. There's a complex, really interesting video about sort of like the event loop and how JavaScript orders all these different actions. The thing to think about, I think, to hold on to right now in terms of why this order is a bit odd is this set timeout function is delegating a process to happen later, right? It's just delegating a process to happen later, but it did get called. It did come up. All right, another question was Joseph asked, can we just use the set timeout function without having to enclose it inside the say hello function? Yeah, absolutely. This is a little bit of a, I don't know, it's a little overly complicated perhaps, this example. So set timeout is its own function here. And to simplify this even further, we don't even need this greet function, right? The simplest example would be something like just adding a console log inside of here, right? This will work as well. This will delay that function from getting called by 2 seconds. And we can see the statement comes out here. So totally fair. Another thing we can do, just to be really clear here, I can define this function up here, call this announce lateness function. We can just pass that function name as an argument as well. This is a callback function because it's a function that's being passed into another function. And this is also a perfectly fine way to reference this. This, I would actually say, is a better way to reference this. It looks a little bit less confusing to me. Notice, though, there's no parentheses on the end of this function. Why is that? Because this is invoking the function. We don't want to pass in the function invocation. We want to pass in the actual function itself, that reference to the function itself. So again, any function that gets passed into another function, that is a callback function. Set timeout is one example of a built-in function that accepts another callback function. All right, let me pause here. Any question on this? I know in terms of like why, it might feel a little shaky, but any question on how we are doing this or any confusion? This I'll say is like, this is pretty tricky. I think this is a relatively advanced concept in JavaScript, being able to pass around functions. It starts to feel a little wacky. All right, cool. I'm gonna guess you all are just like white knuckling it, being like, sounds good so far. What are you gonna tell me next? So let's go ahead and take a look how we can use this callback function to get back to our initial thing, right? We're talking about arrays, talking about looping over arrays. So we'll talk about how to use callback functions with this idea of looping over arrays. So this is an example of using for each. So for each is a method that we get access to on arrays. So we can see here we have our fruits array, apple, banana, cherry, and then we are calling dot for each on this. So again, just to remove some of this other syntax so we can really see it, for each is a method we can call on any array. Now notice what data type is within, what data type is the argument of for each. It is a function. So this function that gets passed in will get called by the underlying code that runs for each. Let's take a look at this. So we have this function. This is an arrow function. Remember this from a couple lessons ago, a lesson ago. We talked about arrow functions. This is just sort of a simplified way to write functions. If we don't like looking at the arrow function, we could replace this. Right? This works as well. This is now an anonymous function. Stick with the arrow function here. We then pass in this function, and let me get back to this in just 1 minute. Make sure I'll cut this out. And couldn't see, I still have the example that here. Okay. I just want to show this like as simply as possible before we get to the more interesting bits. Okay. So right now I'm just calling dot for each. We're passing in a function. And what that function does right now is just console logs out an exclamation point. Let's go ahead and run this code and just see what happens here. Okay, we get 3 exclamation points. If I add another fruit to this, what fruit would be D? We have A, B, C. Is there a fruit that starts with D? Can you all think of any? Oh, durian? That's it. That's a fruit, right? All right, cool. So we add an element to this fruits array. How many times do you think we're going to see an exclamation point? I've changed the fruits array, so there's now 4 elements. Yeah, exactly, right? We're hoping to see 4. Why is that? Based on what we can tell from looking at this, for each is going to run some code for each of the elements in this array. So if we run this code, we do see that it is true, right? We see an exclamation point 4 times. That is each element in the array. Okay, cool. So right now what we can see for each does is it allows us to run some code for each element in the array. Of course, we're running this code because we want to do something with the array, right? As opposed to just running something a number of times. So what for each allows us to do is it tells us, hey, for the callback function you're going to pass in, go ahead and give it this function signature. Go ahead and give it these parameters. I'm going to sort of call it in a certain way. So the first parameter we can use within our callback function references the actual element that is within there. It references the actual element that's within there. So let me go ahead and print out each of those elements and let's see what happens. Okay, we can now see apple, banana, cherry, durian. I know this is probably quite weird, right? Because again, we are not calling this function, right? We're not calling it. We're passing that function into for each. And so it might feel a little strange of like, well, how does it know that this is the first thing, right? In this case, this is just how for each works. It expects the callback function to have a few different arguments, or a few different parameters, I should say. The first of that is going to pass into our passed in callback function is the element itself, the actual element. So we can do things then like, do something interesting, print stuff out, work with these different group names. We could call something like to uppercase on here. All right, we can start to add some code within here to operate on each one of these individual elements. Okay. The second argument that you have access to in here is the index. So I'm going to print out the index. Actually, let's just do this element here. So for each is giving us access to the index as the second parameter. We can then use that parameter within our code to do whatever it is we want. So here we can see each of the indexes are prefixing the element name itself. The last one, actually, no, this is mentioned here. The last one here is the entire collection. And go ahead and run this. We can see we get the index, we get the individual element at that index, and then we get access to the entire collection. So these three parameters, these are the reason we know we can use these is because that's how for each works. There's nothing that's really magical here. For each is going to call the function we pass in. It'll call it with three different arguments. The first one's always going to be the element, the second one will be the index, and the last one will be the entire array that's getting passed in. That is how for each works. Let me pause here. Any questions on this? This definitely is getting a little, it's getting up there, right, in terms of a difficulty. Any questions here? Right, y'all. One last note, as perhaps you all are writing out questions. Just like we did before, we can assign a name to this function. Written details. Right, so if I wanted to assign a name to this function, I can do so. For each would then look like this, right? Remember, we're not invoking it here because that's not the function. We can pass in the function to for each, and it'll go ahead and run it. I personally like how this looks a little bit better because I think it's a little easier to read. It almost reads like a sentence. Fruits, for each fruits, we'll go ahead and print the details, right? It sort of reads kind of nicely. All right, a couple other questions. Are there any more elements attributes for for each? Same thing. Are those the only ones? Yeah, I'm like mostly positive, but hey, let's just check. For each MDN. Yeah, so within the callback function, we got element, index, and array. That's what we're looking at. Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one. I think it's just reduce that has a couple extras, but it's usually just going to be these three. All right, so that is for each. Those are the three parameters you can use. Let's go ahead and look at the next one, which is .map. Right, excellent. .map works similar to for each, but whereas for each does not return anything in particular, .map will return a new array based on, or the values are based on what was returned as part of the callback function. Cool, I see all the questions coming in. Let's pause that. Let's go back to here. All good. Okay, so the first question, can we use a similar let I equals 0 where I changes value with for each? So that is the index here. So we can't add in, we can't like reset where I is equal to. I will always be equal to 0 to start off with, and then we'll iterate as it moves forward. So if we run this code, right, we can see this is 0, 1, 2, 3. And then, yeah, your question, Omar, of it mentions array here instead. Yeah, this is the same thing. Just I just use a different word for it. All of these can be renamed. All of these can be renamed. So I think in the example here, it has fruit, right? And that would actually be a better name than just element, right? This is the actual fruit. Index, you could replace to I. Array collection, all these names are fungible. Either way, for each is just going to pass in three things. The first one's going to be the element that's currently at. The next one's going to be the index it's currently at. The last one's going to be that array, that collection, however you want to call it. Awesome questions. Thanks for asking, y'all. All right, back to this similarly .map. Again, it'll loop over every element of an array. But the callback function that's passed in, whatever the return value of that callback function is, it's going to take the place of that element. So I'm going to just do a couple things here to try and make it a little bit easier to read. I hope it's helping. And cut out some stuff. And then let's just go ahead and log out in the app. I just want to simplify this a little bit here so we can sort of build up to it. So in this example, we have numbers. That's a variable equal to an array of 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a new variable called squares, and that's set equal to the return value of whatever the invocation is of the .map function. Again, just to clarify here, right? We are calling numbers.map. .map is a method that we have access to thanks to the array. We're passing in a function right now. I just simplified it. So we're just going to log out every time the element, sorry, what do I say? We're going to log out for every element in the array. And then we're going to log out whatever this variable is equal to, the squares variable. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so we see here the console log statement within the map method 4 times that is represented as representing each of the 4 elements within this numbers array. We then see squares is an array that has undefined, 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 undefined. That is because for this function, there is no return value, right? There's no return value for this callback function. So let's take a little step forward. Let's go ahead and return something and see how that changes what occurs. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and return true. I'm doing nothing interesting in here. I'm just saying, great, let's go ahead and return true at each step. When I run this code, you can see the thing that changed is our array now has true, 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 true. That's because at the first index, we returned the value true. That's going to take the place of number 1. The next index, we return true. That takes the place of number 2. All right, so in this case, we're just getting back an array of this Boolean true. Let's go ahead and fill it in with what was there before, which was number times number. The thing that we need to do here is just like with for each, the first value that gets passed in is that element. So again, in this case, it's called number. We could call it element and call it whatever we want. We just have to reference it properly. And what's going to get returned is that number squared. Let's go ahead and run that. You can see we still get this console logs. We're within the map method 4 times. Each time this operation is performed, a new array is created where in the first case, it is the result of the expression here, number times number. So 1 times 1 is equal to 1. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. 3 times 3 is equal to 9. 4 times 4 is equal to 16. So the return value here is giving us a new array back. Looks like getting a response. Let me just check this question. Yes, exactly. I've got a thumbs up there. Yeah. So again, these names that we pass into this callback function, these names are for us. The method .forEach.map, it's going to call the function we pass in with certain values in a certain order. We can name those whatever we want. right? So I'm going to talk about it as we're the first one's the element, the second one's the index, right? But again, those could be called whatever you want. .map has the same options for the parameters in here. The first one is going to be the element, and the second one is going to be the index, and the last one's going to be the array. I'll just print out the index here, just so it doesn't get too clogged. We can see here we have access to the index throughout. So you can see it is indeed looping through. So again, the difference here between for each is going to loop over and perform some kind of operation. It doesn't return anything, it's just performing an operation. Whereas .map takes in that callback function. Each time we return within the callback function, it's going to assign that return value to a new array at the given index of what it's currently at. Right, so this first time through, we actually print out both of these values so we can sort of see this getting built up. So the first index, that's index of 0, the value we're going to get returned back is 1. That matches the first slot here in this new array. At index 1, the value that we're going to push back out here is 4, 9, 16. So we can see this array getting built up as we step through it. All right, let me pause here. I think we're doing okay on time, and these next parts will not take quite as long, hopefully. And then we have our break. Any questions here? This, if you're feeling this is tricky, this is tricky. This is not easy stuff. And remember, recall back to what we initially started with and what I had said earlier. The for loop is going to be the sort of default way of looping over arrays. It's a great thing to start with, and hopefully at this point that's making some sense. We return to that. Using these callback functions is really powerful. It's really cool once you start to wrap your mind around it. It makes your code look really nice. It's really easy to work with, but it is definitely a step up, I would say, in terms of challenge. Dragish is asking, can we then later use the resulting array from a .map with a .for or for each? Yeah, exactly, right? You just get an array back, so you can do whatever you want after that. You could even like chain these things. It's actually possible to call for each on .map because .map returns an array. You can like do all kinds of really interesting stuff. The goal of .map is to return a new array that is modified in some way based on that original array. But after that, you can do whatever you like. Right. Don't be shy, y'all. If you have a question, please do ask. I know it's getting tricky. All right, just to wrap up here. So where we started from was using a for loop. Again, I want this to sort of stick in your mind is this is sort of the typical way of looping through arrays. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed here with this looping part, this is what I return back to in practice first and foremost. That's feeling good. Then we can start talking about for each and .map. For each and .map, both use a callback function. A callback function is just a special name for a function that gets passed into another function. That other function, that will determine when that function you passed in, when that callback function is called. The wrapping function, that's what's going to determine which parameters you have access to. You can name these parameters whatever you like. It's typically like when you're looking at like documentation, it's going to be something like element, index, an array, or collection. And then you can, of course, use these however you want. For each will not return a value as part of this overall statement, but .map will return a new array. That's how .map works. It returns a new array based off of the return value, depending on what you returned inside that callback function. All right, last little bit here. There's a couple other built-in properties and methods that I think are useful to talk about. So let's walk through a few of them. Excuse me. Oof. All right, the first one we're going to look at is shift. So shift is a method you call on arrays that removes an element from the beginning of an array. So we have two examples here, which I think it's kind of nice to be able to look at how this worked more manually and then how shift has improved this. So let's actually look at the method first down here. So for using a method, we have let fruits equal apple, orange, banana. We then call fruits.shift, and the output is just orange and banana. So .shift will shift the first element of the array off of from that array. So the resulting array has one less element. We take a look at how we'd manually have to do that. We can see here this code, what this code is doing, which looks maybe a little wild, but is pretty neat. It is saying, okay, go ahead and loop through this array, right? We're going to go from I equals 0, I is less than fruits.length minus 1, I plus plus. It's then reassigning at each step the next element. So at index 0, that gets assigned to orange. At index 1, that gets assigned to banana. At index 2 gets assigned to undefined. And then fruits.pop is just removed from the very end. So we end up with this array of 2 items. So what could be a lot of work is instead solved with just calling .shift. .shift removes the first element of an array. Very similar to how .pop works, but .pop works on the end of an array. There is our shift. I don't think there's anything more to say here. We'll have multiple methods that will allow us to modify these different values. Just like .pop, if you call .shift method, you can access that removed value by assigning it to a variable and then reference it later. Otherwise, it is just gone. Unshift is going to do the opposite of shift. It is going to add an element to the front of an array. I don't know if this is the greatest name. It feels a little confusing. We're saying unshift, but we're adding something, whatever. This is just what it's called. So if we unshift something, that is going to add an element to the front of the array. So our example here is let fruits equal banana and cherry. Fruits.unshift apple. The return value of unshift is the new length of the array. So that's 3. And then fruits, we can see apple was added to the front here. All right. So unshift is going to add an element to the start of the array. Shift is going to remove an element from the front of the array. Push is going to push an element onto the end of an array. Pop is going to remove an element from the end of an array. All right, just a couple more here. So the next one is slice. The slice method is a built-in array method in JavaScript that is used to create a shallow copy of a portion of an array. We'll talk about what that means. It returns a new array containing the selected elements without modifying the original array. When slice is called on an array, it takes 2 optional arguments, the start index and the end index. The method extracts elements from the start index up to, but not including, the end index. If the end index is omitted, it extracts elements from the start index to the end of the array. So I'm going to go ahead and run this one because it's going to get a little tricky here. So we have a fruits array. This has, oh, date. That's a good fruit that starts with D as well, dates. All right, so we have selected fruits, fruits.slice 1, 3. So this first one is the index that it starts at. 3 is going to be the index that it ends at, but not including that value. So the index of 3 is 0, 1, 2, 3. That's date. So we're going to grab banana and cherry by slicing from 1 to 3. And that is indeed the overall output. .slice does not change the overall array, which is quite useful. All right, so let's actually play around with this one because this is a little tricky. Okay, so here we have our fruits array. Fantastic. If I call just slice, you'll see I'm getting a new array. All right, I'm just getting what's called a shallow copy. The reason it's called a shallow copy is because if we had some nested data structures in here, which we will not see today, I don't believe, it would not make a complete copy of all of them. But in this case, with just strings, it's going to create a perfectly fine copy. So when we call .slice with no arguments, it's just creating a duplicate of that array. If I pass in an index in here, it's going to grab everything from that index to the very end and give us a copy of those values. So if I say slice 0, that's giving us a copy of the entire array. If I say dot slice at 1, notice we're just getting from index 1 all the way to the end. I get from index 2 all the way to the end, index 3 all the way to the end. If I go beyond it, I'm just going to get a empty array. All right. If I pass in a second argument, this is going to be the index that the slice stops up to, but not including. All right, so if I say 1 to 1, I'm going to get nothing because this exclusion sort of window is cutting each other out. If I say from 1 to 2, it's saying, okay, go into the fruits array, go to index 1, and grab everything up to, but not including index 2. That is just the one element, right? If I say index 3 here, it's going to say banana and cherry, because cherry has an index of 2, whereas date has an index of 3, but it's not including date. I say up to 4, which is the overall length of the array, right? It's going up to the very end, grabbing everything else that is the same in this case as just saying. So slice allows us to pull out a subsection of the array. This is another way to think of it. It allows us to pull out maybe just the front, maybe just the end, maybe the middle, right? It allows us to find some sort of subarray within that larger array. All right, any questions on this? I know it's getting, I'm sure brains are full, our cups overflow with information. All right. Everything's making sense, or everyone's feeling stressed. Okay. So our last method to learn. This one is pretty easy, thankfully. Our last method here is index of. This allows us to pass in a value and see at what index that value shows up in the array. So the example here, I'll go ahead and open this up right here so we can try this out as well. Just something didn't work there. All right, there we go. So we have our fruits array, apple, banana, cherry, banana again. Fruits index of banana, index of will find the first occurrence of this string banana within the array. So in this case, it tells us 1 because 1 is the first time that banana appeared. If I said fruits index cherry, what do y'all think? What's going to show up if sorry, not index, index of, it's just going to tell me the answer. It is. All right. I can't ask you. It's too clever. Yeah, I got it. Thanks, Rakesh, and thanks, Asara. So it's giving us 2 for index of cherry because in this array, I've got 0, 1, 2. Cherry is at index 2. If you ask for something that doesn't exist within the array, so if I ask for date, you'll get back a value of -1. So just note here when using index of, we'll get back a value of -1 if this value cannot be found within the overall array. And that's index of. Not actually too bad. We can pass in a value, check if that value is within the array. If it is, we'll get back the index. If it's not, we'll get back -1. That is how index of works. All right. Whew. We went through a lot. The next part here is our exercise. Let's go ahead and do this pretty quick. And then we'll go ahead and take our break and give you a little bit of time to work on that lab. I'll go ahead and just go through this just to save time. But if you can, go ahead and follow along with me. So we're going to explore some of these array methods. We're going to initialize a new variable here called animals. We're going to set that equal to a few different animals. We got cat, dog, rabbit, bird, fish. All right, so there's our animals array. Then we're going to try some of these new methods. So first, let's go ahead and push a new animal on to the end of that array. Let's add a capybara. Do you like capybaras? They're the largest rodent, I think. They're very cute. Let's go ahead and print out animals here and see what we got. So we can see, remember, push does indeed add an element to the very end of that array. All right, that is push. If we pop a value, we're going to remove the last element of the array. That would be our capybara. We can store that value within a new variable. So we can see here, it was indeed added. We then popped it off. We get back to our original list, and we have capybara. So pop and push are going to modify the very end of our array. We can do the same thing with unshift and shift, which is the next couple steps here. So if we said animals dot unshift, remember that's going to add something to the very front of the array. Let's add a flamingo, and then we hit animals dot shift. If we print these out once more, we'll be back to our original array, right? Because we have added flamingo to the very front and then removed it from the very front as well. So unshift and shift, modify the front of the array, pop and push, modify the end of the array, put it another way. If we push or shift, or sorry, push or unshift, that's going to add elements. If we shift or pop, that's going to remove elements. All right, if we use a slice, we can get a subset. So if I say animals.slice, let's say 1 to 4. That will give us just a subsection of that array as a new array. So slice allows us to pluck out some values from an array within an array. And the last thing we can check here is we can indeed check whether or not a certain animal is within that array. So for example, for animals index of, we could check for bird. We could also check for index of flamingo. We'll clear this out. In this first example of index of, we would expect the value to be 0, 1, 2, 3. Right? That's the index of where the first occurrence of bird is. For flamingo, because it would have been added and then removed, we should expect to see -1, because it no longer is in the array. So we see this, run this code, we do indeed see that. All right, I think I topped you all off with new information. Let's go and take our break. Let's go for an 8-minute break so we can get back here 10 after. All right. Once we do that, I'll go ahead and introduce the lab. We'll start to talk through it, and then you all can get finished up with the last little bit of our class. That's it. Take a break, a stretch. I'll see you all in just a few minutes. All right. Hey, folks. Welcome back. Hope you all had a nice little brain break. If we can, I'd love to throw up one of our little surveys, just checking on how you all are doing with this content so far. I know today and last week have been a lot. There's a lot going on. So yeah, do you mind sharing one of those, or I guess Veronica sharing one of those surveys that we have? Cool.
You
All
mean
right.
like a Zoom poll?
Yes, Zoom poll. Sorry.
Yes. I got it right now. There we go.
Excellent. All right, y'all. So you can just give this a look, just a couple questions here, and then we will continue. Right. Thank you all participated. Just a couple more responses. All right, excellent. Cool. All right, if you haven't finished that yet, please do, but excellent work, thank you. It sounds like folks are feeling okay, which, you know what, that's great. We've been going over a lot of stuff, so if you're feeling, that's probably right on track. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and introduce this lab for today. I think this lab is great. It's gonna be challenging, but I want to make sure you all have some time to noodle on this for sure. We probably will not have time to go over it today. I'll see if we can carve out some time on Thursday to go through a solution or see if there's any particular questions about it. But I think this is a good challenge for y'all to be working through. So for this lab, we're going to create a console to-do list. The idea is that you're going to build sort of a little console program that allows you to add items to a to-do list, complete them, and remove them from the list. That to-do list, is probably going to be an array. It'd be a good guess. It's probably going to be an array. So the features of this are to add tasks. We're going to allow users to add new tasks to the to-do list. We're going to display the current list of tasks with an indicator for completed tasks, so some kind of way to view everything. We're going to complete tasks, so let users mark tasks as complete. And then we're going to remove tasks, enable users to remove tasks from the list. And then finally, some way to exit the application itself. There's a series of implementation steps here for you all to follow. I'll leave that to you, but just in terms of the sample output here, I just want to show you this example. So when you first arrive, when this program is first run, you'll see something that looks like this. You should, of course, feel free to add whatever excitement you want to this. There are 5 different options: add, view, complete, or remove a task. If you're going to add a task, you're going to provide a way for the user to enter in some text, something like buy groceries. If you want to view all tasks, you're going to show the tasks. The tasks should have some way to indicate whether they are done or not. That's what this little bracket is showing. Show the index of that task. So this is something like 0, buy groceries. You can tell this is part of an array. If you choose the complete a task option, it's going to ask you to provide the index of the task to complete. So for example, for buy groceries, that would be 0. If you view it again, as you can see, this is showing sort of like this, there's a completion here, right? You want some way to enter the index of the task to be removed. If that happens, when you review it, right, in this case, there are now no tasks. And then finally, some way to actually exit the application. You can follow this format exactly. You could do something else, like you could change these to have certain words. Maybe it's add, view, complete, remove, exit, right? We've done this in our previous projects. We can try this out in a new and exciting way. There is a solution here. I'd really encourage you all to try this out on your own. Really nice challenge is going to combine all the different things that you all have worked on. And of course, just as a reminder to start this, these tasks are probably going to be stored in some kind of array. So the array might start empty. And then as you're adding tasks, you might add something like buy groceries overall. And you, of course, remove those items as well, depending on the index. So the thing that you are going to want to be thinking about are things like .push to add tasks to the very end. You want to think about .slice, perhaps, to remove items from the array. The thing you have to figure out is how to figure out, is a task completed or not? And there's a few different ways you could do that. One way you could do that is by keeping a list of completed tasks, in which case maybe you can check the task to the completed task. If something is within completed, maybe that means it's completed. And for something like that, you might want to use index of something like that. So a lot of different ways to solve this. I would start is go ahead and read through the implementation steps, and then just write out some pseudocode, write out some comments that help you set up, what am I trying to do? What do I think I'll need to do within here? I'll say I think this is a pretty big lab, but again, I think it's a good challenge for you all, and is the right level, I think, of difficulty of like really stretching you all to master these concepts. All right, I'll stop yammering there. Give you all the rest of the time to work on this. As you all have questions, please do ask them in our live chat channel, and I'll be posting just an answer to another question that's asked earlier in the extra help channel. Yeah, okay, just taking a look at some of the comments here. Yeah, I would say if y'all need more time for this, and I'll flag this for Veronica and Ivan as well. To me, this feels like this might take more than 24 hours for sure. So definitely I would expect to get some requests for a little bit extra time. To me, this again feels like the right level of difficulty for you all. To help, I don't believe there is a lab for the next lesson. There are some exercises, but you all will have a bit of time to work on this one as far as I can see. All right, good luck. Let us know if you have any questions. And we'll have, it looks like about, oh goodness, 13 minutes. Oh, the window's in the way. About 12 minutes to work on this before we close out for today. All right, get to it, y'all.